Hi guys, I'm Dr. Squared. Humans are chaotic by nature. Like nature, like some atoms, since their existence, very unstable. Possibly due to faulty genetic code or an inherent nature to be evil, unstable, super predatorial, tendency to dominate. I think we're far less important than we perceive ourselves to be. That's just my opinion. Empires rise, reign, fall throughout history. What used to be religious war became proxy war, territorial war, trade war, psychological war. And with psychological warfare, it's more subtle than you think. I mean, if you feed in the mainstream media, then you'll realize that there is psychological warfare taking place. Unfortunately, in warfare, the vulnerable is most affected. But in psychological warfare, they attack the mind of the vulnerable. The vulnerable mind are most commonly affected. What is psychological warfare? Why is this important? Psychological warfare is said to be the use of propaganda, threats, non-combative techniques during a war, threats of war, or period of geopolitical unrest, specifically to intimidate, demoralize, or influence the thinking or behavior of an enemy. But first, you have to know who your enemy is. Do you know who your enemy is?
Do you know who your enemy is? Do you know who your enemy is?
Apparently, propaganda has shades. There's a white propaganda, gray propaganda, black propaganda. In psychological warfare, white propaganda, the information is truthful. Gray propaganda, the information is mostly truthful. In black propaganda, the information is false, fake, or deceitful. Do you know who your enemy is? Even though some of us might think psychological warfare is new, psychological warfare is of ancient origin. They used it against Babylon and Athens. We also see this through social media, algorithm manipulation, mainstream media in 2020. Because psychological warfare is so deceptive, a revolution that's taken place is unsuspecting to many. So with the chaotic nature of man, wars or invasion can lead to extinction or displacement of large groups of people. For example, the Americas was filled with only black and brown people before the Europeans came. They came from Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Italy. When they came, they redefined the definition of who an American was, which completely erased the indigenous American population. Jamaica was filled with black and brown people before the Spanish people came and erased them. Same for Australia and Spain. In Spain, they called it the rise and fall of the Muslim in the West, but they were your ancestors. They were predominantly black and brown people who dominated Spain. Granada, once the greatest city in Spain, between the years 711 to 1492. For almost 800 years, look at the timeline. That was almost 1,000 years before the transatlantic slave trade. Your ancestors dominated, populated, created civilization, cultural practices long before the rest of Europe was civilized. The most dominant site that remains today is called the Alhambra. That actually showed that they existed. At that time, there were great mathematicians who created structures, architecture, and eventually the Christian came, King Ferdinand, Isabella, and they conquered and displaced them. Why don't we know much about this? Because there was a deliberate attempt to erase this history from history, to erase you from history, to erase your history from history. So seeing that we're on the chaotic nature of man, World War I, I would prefer to call it the Great European War. They called it the World War, but it was in Europe. Just like we call other wars, Vietnam War, Afghanistan War, Korean War, Spanish War, American Civil War, Mexican War. I think it's fair to call the war created by the Europeans in Europe the Great War of Europe. So the first war would be the First Great European War. And you know what the Second World War would be. Every war that took place on this earth occurred in this world. Therefore, it's grossly inaccurate to label any war a world war. Unless you're trying to evade the label, it's called psychological manipulation. So yes, First Great European War began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. His murder capitulated into a war across Europe that lasted for 4 years. During the conflict, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania. Sounds about European to me. Of course, Japan, the United States, and many other countries eventually. You could also call this the Great Caucasian War. After all, these were all Caucasians fighting against each other. And this is not new. They've been fighting against each other since the beginning of time, since they knew they were Caucasian. But does this have anything to do with being Caucasian? Not really, except for the part where they are responsible for all man-made greatest catastrophes. But on a smaller scale, it's definitely the nature of mankind. Look at the Chinese with their own people. Look at the Indians with their own people. Look at black people with their own people. So now that you know this, let's go on a mission.
Eradicate, exterminate, annihilate all evil people from this earth.
Oh crap, we can't. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, doesn't become a monster. Okay, so back to the Great War of Europe. As we know, Jamaica was still a British colony at that time, and there we were. Jamaica was fighting a war that they did not create, that they had nothing to do with. We sent 10,000 of our men on the front line. Almost 200 of them died during combat. A significant amount also died from frostbite and pneumonia. What's also important is despite our Jamaican soldiers fighting along with British troops, or Jamaican soldiers were still treated unfairly. In 1918, they increased the pay of the British soldiers, but did not increase the pay for the Jamaican soldiers or the members of the West Indian Regiment. The increase was withheld until the West Indian Contingent Committee wrote to the government with signatures of 7 ex-West Indian government in protest. So let's this in the history books for young men today, for the future. The only war you fight in the future is the war for your people. The only fight you fight is the fight to uplift your people, to protect, serve, and respect our women, to love and nurture as they have nurtured you. Your loyalty lies with them. There is no way you can re-emerge as the powerful element that you are in this world without your woman. Out of chaos comes order, as nature always finds a way to correct itself. From the chaotic mind, then psychological warfare. There is a war to control who you are, how you think, how you feel about yourself. These are presented to you subliminally in movies, music videos, television series, reality shows, the news, the internet. Pay attention. What you should see in yourself is not what you see in abundance. What you shouldn't see in yourself is what you see in abundance. And yet we think we're in full control. Do you even know why you are how you are? Do you even know why you wear what you wear? Do you even know why the self you choose to project to the world is the self that you project? Programming the subconscious mind can reprogram the conscious mind. The neurons in your brain only fire in response to electric signal firing at them. He who controls the narrative controls the mind of the people. He who controls the mind of the people controls the action of the people. He who controls the action of the people controls the people.